And I will talk about Antonio Sant'Elia, an architect who had the misfortune to die at 28, but he's still present in the discourse about architecture, and he will always be present. And he only left behind drawings. One building was built, though, based on one of his drawings by Giuseppe Terrani, a very important rationalist Italian architect. But let's read a little bit about this phenomenon, because Antonio Sant'Elia was a phenomenon. You know, living such a short life, architects usually live long lives, and still he matters. This was the man, and he matters not only because he was a good Italian man, good-looking Italian man. I mean, most Italian men are good-looking. What can we do about it? And they know how to dress, unless they are Renzo Piano, who doesn't know how to dress, and it's just amazing. It's amazing that an architect of the caliber of Renzo Piano doesn't know how to dress. I mean, yes, Sir Norman Foster sometimes shows questionable taste in his choice of pinkish shirts, but Renzo Piano, I don't know if I ever saw him well dressed. But this is not the case of Antonio Sant'Elia. Let's read a little bit about him. So he was born in 1888, 1 year younger than Le Corbusier. In fact, not 1 year, because Le Corbusier was born in October and Antonio Sant'Elia in April the next year. Le Corbusier in 1887. So, half a year younger than Le Corbusier. And unfortunately, he died in 1916. 28, was an Italian architect and a key member of the Futurist movement in architecture. He left behind almost no completed works of architecture and is primarily remembered for his bold sketches and influence on modern architecture. Now that word almost is unnecessary. I don't know of any building he himself built. The Manifesto of Futurist Architecture was published in August 1914, so 2 years before he died, supposedly by Sant'Elia, though this is subject to debate. In it, the author stated that, I quote, "the decorative value of Futurist architecture depends solely on the use and original arrangement of raw or bare or violently colored materials. His vision was for a highly industrialized and mechanized city of the future, which he saw not as a mass of individual buildings, but a vast, multi-level, interconnected and integrated urban conurbation designed around the life of the city." So between 1912 and 1914, influenced by industrial cities of the United States and the architects Otto Wagner, Adolf Loos, and the Genoese architect Renzo Picasso, I didn't know this architect, he began a series of design drawings for a futurist Città Nuova, the new city, that was conceived as a symbol of a new age. Many of these drawings were displayed at the only exhibition of the Nuove Tendenze group, of which he was a member, exhibition in May-June 1914 at the Famiglia Artistica Gallery. Today, many of these drawings are on permanent display at Pinacoteca Como's Art Gallery. So let's look at his drawings. How could it be that an architect, until he was 28 or even 26, because he died at 28, but he made most of his drawings before as well, is still moving architecture, is still moving the world of architecture and the discourse about architecture. But then why does Piranesi do the same thing? Because Piranesi also, he built a little bit, but very little and insignificantly. Piranesi, and the student told me just a few days ago that Eisenman himself considers very, very highly Piranesi. He's not the only one. Piranesi is on the list of mentors or significant influencers, if I am to call him so, by Rem Koolhaas and even Wolf Prix. Piranesi and Piranesi and Piranesi, with his fantastic scenes of Carceri, the prisons. Here we have drawings by Sant'Elia. So a drawing could be real. Those who think, a drawing is not real, it's just a drawing, are wrong. In fact, I would say many built buildings, are less real than this drawing done by Antonio Sant'Elia. Because what does it mean to be real? Just because you erect the walls, well, there are many buildings in the world that are, so-called standing up, but they are totally meaningless and no one talks about them and they have no relevance for art, for architecture, for culture, because architecture, Alvar Aalto was totally right. Architecture does not belongs to culture. Architecture belongs to culture, not to civilization. This drawing belongs to culture, and it is alive, and it is very well done. And Antonio Sant'Elia, gained his immortality because of these fragile drawings. Now, the architecture he depicted is not so fragile. I would agree. It's a tumultuous, urban, forward-looking architecture. Maybe today we don't quite believe any longer in such things, but no one can deny the beauty and even the rigor, the precision of some of his drawings, like this one, Città Nuova. Why was he thinking about the Città Nuova, the new city? Because the architect is supposed to think about the future as well. There are many works by many architects that especially when they didn't have too many commissions, they indulge in creative schemes for either Paris, like Le Corbusier and his Ville Radieuse, or Broadacre City by Frank Lloyd Wright. It's in the nature of architecture to project horizons of hope, and thus to imagine sometimes even the unimaginable. It's important to keep the flame of architecture, the spirit of architecture. It's important to do such works as well, and not only build buildings that someone commissioned you to build, because there are plenty of architects in the world that will die in obscurity, and people will continue to talk about Antonio Sant'Elia, who didn't build, but he didn't have to, because there is truth and there is reality in his drawings and his imaginings, even though he made them more than 100 years ago. They are good drawings and they are good visions. He envisioned certain architecture, and he did so convincingly. And then you also have to understand, he was young. He was in his 20s, about the age of some of the students who are here. He was not much older, maybe 1 or 2 years older or something like this. See, he could have been a student at 28. He was a student, in fact, because I think a great anything is a student all or his or her life. All of it, because a true Newton was too. Any creator in any field, exactly because he's in the process of becoming even younger, because as Le Corbusier said, the problem in life is not to remain young, but to become young. It's this quest for, it's a quest for lapis, as the alchemists called it, the philosophical stone, the fountain of eternal youth. This is what humankind always search for, the fountain of the eternal youth. That's why there are people in the 90s, and I mentioned Eisenman, and I like this fact very much. At almost 90, Eisenman is studying Alberti, Renaissance spirit. And he was, at least, for a time, associated with the deconstructivists. So Frampton is very alive at 92. Frampton, when he received the Golden Lion at the Venice Biennial, he was, I think, 88 then. And I never saw all my life until now, and I'll probably die, and never see someone laughing as Frampton laughed in Venice at 88. He was probably approaching 89 when he received the Golden Lion. Search for his picture. It's unbelievable. I mean, that kind of intoxicating laughter, mad laughter, is certainly the laughter of someone who achieved or was very close to reaching that fountain of eternal truth, eternal youth, sorry. So, back to Antonio Sant'Elia, who was young, though. He didn't have to, search for, unfortunately, he died young, but he was young when he did all these sketches and these drawings. Of course, the pragmatist and the functionalist would say he was mad. Who asked him to do these drawings? Who asked him to imagine, Città Nuova, the new city? Nobody. But then who asks a poet to write poetry? Who asks a painter, a genuine painter, to paint? Nobody. When Joseph Brodsky, the youngest poet who received the Nobel Prize for Poetry, I told this short story, but it's my pleasure to repeat it. He was living in St. Petersburg. He was Russian, and of course, he was destitute and he was not working. And because it was communism, was in Soviet Union, he was brought to justice because he was considered a parasite. And there was a court procedure against him. And you can find on the web the stenogram of the dialogue between the judge and the trembling, or maybe not so trembling, very young poet. And the judge asked him, what do you do for a living? He said, I write poetry and I make translations. He said, did anybody ask you to write poetry and make translations? He said, no. Did you go to a school to learn how to write poetry and to do translations? He said, no. Then he said, how come you dare to indulge in writing poetry when the comrades are working and you are just fooling around, reading and translating Dante and who knows who? And Brodsky said, well, nobody had to ask me, or nobody had to teach me. It came from God. Well, he said the truth, actually. It came from God. Some people are chosen by God. Of course, they pay for this great privilege. Usually they have hard lives and so on. But you are inspired. You are just a medium. In fact, it wasn't Joseph Brodsky. It was maybe, let's say, God himself or herself or itself, because we don't know what God is. Sorry for my iconoclasm. Acted through him, and he was a medium, a terrestrial medium chosen for this. A very important poet. One day I will tell you a story about Brodsky when I met him, and he was immensely miserable. And I have from Brodsky a letter, which is the ugliest letter ever written to me. Anyway, it was about the death of book. Anyway, let's go back to the drawings of Antonio Sant'Elia, another man inspired by the gods, by the celestial forces, who choose certain people among us to, express things that until then were not expressed. Of course, architecture is an art. Of course, it's different than what Brâncuș thought, because Brâncuș thought that a building is an inhabited sculpture. No, I think it's a little bit more complicated. That's why often there are the words art and architecture. Although at its best, architecture becomes an art. And the building, in order to become architecture, has to do it through art. But there are distinctions between art and architecture. And, are these works artistic? They are. Are they architectural? They are. They are both. Those who contest the artistic quality of architecture, as I said many times, should just open almost any history of art, and architecture will be copiously present there. Maybe even the drawings of Antonio Sant'Elia. This is the building that was built based on this very drawing, actually, but it was built after his death by, I think, at least 10 years after he did it, maybe more, by Giuseppe Terrani and helped by Marinetti, the futurist poet, who understood the value of the drawings by Antonio Sant'Elia, and they were able to, I don't know exactly who paid for. It was built almost identical with what you look here, and I don't know if I have a picture of it here. I should. The Monument to the Fallen. Yes, here it is. Again, it was built based on this drawing by Antonio Sant'Elia, but it was built after he died by Giuseppe Terrani. And it is an impressive building. I hope I have a text here about it. Let me see. No, sorry. Now my presentation needs some improvement, sorry, but this is the monument designed by Antonio Sant'Elia, or envisioned by Sant'Elia, drawn by Sant'Elia, but built by Giuseppe Terrani and some other people. But Terrani and a moral helper there was, and maybe more than moral, was Marinetti, the important futurist poet. And actually the manifesto, the Futurist manifesto, is debated if it was written by, I think initially was written by Marinetti, and then Antonio Sant'Elia wrote a second version. There are two versions, I think, of the Futurist manifestos, and manifesto, and one is by Marinetti, one by Antonio Sant'Elia, and it's possible there is some kind of a hybrid manifesto that was born from the collaboration between the two. It's a monument, but it has an appreciable modernity, I would say, still very much a monument, yes. Now this is something, it's a visualization, it's a render, as Arch Daly uses this word. I used to know the word rendering, but they use the word render. It's a rendering based on a visualization, sophisticated and complex, based on the drawings of Antonio Sant'Elia. It's not bad. I mean, somebody did some work here. By the way, there is a book with the digital building of the unbuilt works of Louis Kahn. I used to have that book. I don't know if I still have it. It's very moving because, some of these renderings, you could almost swear that they are, they show the reality that it was built. There are books published by Sant'Elia. There was a commemoration, and they published many. You see, visione regola, vision rule, regulation, futurismo e razionalismo nel monumento al caduti di Como. But the rationalism, I guess, is via Giuseppe Terrani, who was a rationalist architect, and quite a good architect himself. Here is another one, All'origine del progetto, Antonio Sant'Elia, Pinacoteca di Como. In Como, there is a very important, maybe the most important building by Giuseppe Terrani, Casa del Fascio. He was also a fascist, but those intellectuals had a different understanding of fascism than we do. Well, later, after the misery and the tragedy of the Second World War. Antonio Sant'Elia e l'architettura del suo tempo, Convenio Internazionale in 2016. You see, this young man who died at 28, almost 100 years later, there are conferences, there are books published, posters made, because it is spirit. It is the spirit of the work that transcends time and transcends, frontiers, physical frontiers as well. Antonio Sant'Elia, Il futuro delle città. Are we thinking about the future of the city? Some of us are. There are projects, now confronted with various crises. Let's hope we'll survive this horrible tragedy in Ukraine, and maybe humankind will, and also the pandemic, and maybe we'll think again about horizons of hope. Now, I want to end this presentation. This doesn't really have a relation with, I mean, it does, because I will show some futurist architecture, but from Africa. I thought to include this short material about it because I myself, I was surprised. I didn't know there was a futurist architecture in Africa. You wouldn't expect it to be in Africa, but Italian architects actually built some so-called futurist buildings in Asmara, Eritrea. And I want you to see them by the way of Antonio Sant'Elia, who was and is considered a futurist architect. So once a sleepy corner of the Italian empire. So that's the reason the Italian architects built in Eritrea's capital, because it was, part of the Italian, it was a colony of Italy. In Eritrea's capital, Asmara, is home to one of the world's best collections of futurist architecture. Yes, this happens because, I'm sure, or I think, or I hope that the Second World War didn't arrive in Eritrea. So here it is, a gas station, if you can believe it. It's in Africa, but it's, look at that canopy. And not just the canopy, the whole building has a exaltation that, indeed futurism was aspiring towards. Interesting work, particularly that, audacious canopy. Look how it looks from above. Not bad. Not bad at all. If you build such a building today, it doesn't have to be for Fiat, because you see the name of the Italian car right there on the facade of the building. But if you build such a building today, you'd make it to the pages, either digital or so-called real, of magazines. Eritrea. Let's read again. What's the capital of Eritrea? Asmara. Nice name, Asmara. So Asmara, I'm sure I will forget it because I don't have at all the memory of names. Now, an Orthodox church. This is an interesting building, and it's even more interesting because it is in Africa. But then I showed not too long ago, a few days ago, that formidable sunken church in Ethiopia. One of the most remarkable churches in the world, in my opinion. But look at this one. This one is not bad either. But it's true, it was built by Italian architects. But, somehow, who knows, maybe the landscape, the light, the sky, the earth itself inspired the architect, because I don't know, it's possible this very building, if it was built in Italy, would not have looked like this. It's possible. Yes, it's a little bit, not a little bit, it is symmetrical, it's, it has a geometry that is hard not to notice, but I think it's interesting. This is not a church, it's a house, a villa in Asmara, in Eritrea, Africa. And here is another building in the corner of a street. interesting. No, I really found out about this. I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago. That's it. So let's wish Antonio Sant'Elia happy birthday, and also Hans Pelzik happy birthday, and thank you for being here